The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. We're celebrating the 100th episode of the Habit Podcast. We're celebrating so hard, in fact, that we're now on the 101st episode and still celebrating. This is part 2 of a special retrospective. I asked podcast listeners to tell me some of their favorite moments from the first 99 episodes. Producer Drew Miller joins me as we replay and relive some of these favorite moments. One of the moments that several people identified as among their favorites was when Brown Bannister starts talking about the difference between saying, "Here I am," and "There you are." Mm. And I remember something that Ben Shive told me that he was quoting you, and you may have been, I think you were quoting somebody else, but that there are people in the world who are kind of "here I am," and there are the people who say "there you are." Mm-hmm. And you're very much a "there you are" kind of. You seem to have embraced that as your calling, to say, "It's my."
That's fair.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair.
Of helping other people.
Yeah.
Find their, do their best work.
Yeah.
And I'm just interested in. That's not a question. That was a statement, but. That's
okay. Well, actually, the quote, I don't know where it came from, but my oldest son, Ben, I don't even know what the context was. We might have been talking about Peter Pan, Hook, mm-hmm. That version with Robin Williams. Yeah. And, that scene when he's old and pudgy and got glasses and a beard and doesn't look anything like Peter Pan. And all the Lost Boys are there. And he's thinking, oh my goodness, here's all the Lost Boys, but they don't recognize him. Yeah. And then finally, they're who is this? What's going on? And then one of them just takes off the glasses and pulls his face back so it's not wrinkled and everything. And he says, "There you are, Peter," which is what a sweet moment, right? Yeah. And I think we were talking about that, and Ben said, my son Ben, said, there's really two kinds of people, if you have to break it down into two kinds. Richard Rohr would not approve of that, but dualistic thinking. But there are two kinds of people in terms of how people present themselves. There's a "here I am" person, like you said, and "there you are" person. And that just really struck me.
I think one of the things that people who don't write or people who don't think of themselves as creative people maybe think of creative people as being here I am people.
Sure.
And that my experience, which has been very much affirmed in the process of recording these episodes, is that there's a whole lot of there you are among people who are doing creative work. And they really are looking to serve and looking to encourage and give hope and tell other people they're not alone.
Yeah. Yeah, I that just helped frame something that I've heard Carolyn Aaron say. She talked about how for the longest time she was just overcome with stage fright every time she would be playing music for anybody. And the thing that changed it for her was being reminded that her role on the stage is not to be here I am. It's not to be perfect and be the object of attention. It's actually to allow those in attendance to engage with their own emotions.
Yeah.
And so she really is just a kind of a conduit. She's up there helping the listener to get to know themselves better even. And so when she heard that, she was able to switch from stage fright to curiosity. Just like, well, I'm here and you're here.
Yeah.
And how can I know you? And how can I help you? And how can I, and I love that. Not only is that true, that she's a there you are person, but that even making that switch to there you are helped her overcome stage fright. So
that's great.
It's even a very practical sort of.
Yeah, I've got a story about that. But first, we need to get Carolyn on the podcast. Do you have her email?
Yeah.
Okay, what is it? I'm just kidding.
I memorized it.
When I was in the depths of writer's block with Charlatans Boy, just could not get it done. Gone, I don't know how long without producing any new pages, and didn't know what I was going to do. It was just sort of this whirlhole of self-loathing, and I got an email from a longtime reader, who said, "Hey, I just want to let you know I kind of need this book." and I can't remember how she phrased it exactly, but it just shook me out of that idea that this writer's block was my personal tragedy.
Yeah.
And I said, oh yeah, there are people who might need this for some reason.
Yeah.
And that just really opened things up for me.
Yeah, you're implicated in the readership. It's not just you.
Yeah.
It's not a closed system.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of reminds me of Doug McKelvey, Every Moment Holy, just the being told, hey, I need this. This is a resource. This isn't just your work of art.
Yeah.
Which I think the best works of art are that way, transcend just being works for themselves.
Or they go beyond self-expression to something else.
Yeah.
One of the recurring themes throughout these episodes, one of several recurring themes has been community and the idea of that we need each other if we're going to be doing creative work. And I think the person who was most articulate on that subject probably was Ned Bustard.
If I'm making, then I'm doing what God has made me to do, and I think that's my calling. I see that as being something that I do for my community, rather than on a large stage.
Yeah. I end up on this podcast talking a good bit about this idea of writing for your community, for actual people, and how that can be it can often be the answer to writer's block. When you think I'm trying to do something for the public or whatever, that's who knows what's going to come of that. But when you're thinking I'm going to do something that's going to serve these three people who I know and who come over to my house sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah. I find that that's definitely the case for me, because when I try to think about what the public or people or they will want, it usually is kind of crippling. But when I think, most of the people who have my artwork live within walking distance of me. So I know what the work will look like on their walls. When I think about what I'm going to make, I make it in a size that can fit a frame that they can buy at their local craft store, and that's going to fit on their walls, not on some kind of crazy big New York apartment wall.
One of the members of the Habit said, I remember exactly where I was when I heard that. It gave me the courage to pick up 2 different projects that I just kind of dropped. I got back to work on them because I started to think about my friends and neighbors who might really benefit from my work on their behalf. I've thought about that moment so many times since then.
That's so good. It kind of even dovetails with something I've heard you say about when you're writing a book and you're stuck, and as soon as you started to envision a specific person, a friend, you were addressing the book to them, and it just started. I just want to tell this person about Flannery O'Connor.
Yeah, that person was Andy Osinga, by the way.
Andy Osinga, there you go. That's what I thought. I didn't want to get it wrong.
Yep.
But yeah,
because Andy and I had gone. We were bowling, and he said, "What are you? You just how you talk to people while you're waiting for the ball to come back when you're bowling." Right. And he said, "What are you working on?" I said, I'm working on a book about Flannery O'Connor," and then kind of said, "It's for well-read Christian people who have heard they're supposed to like Flannery O'Connor, but they just don't." And he's like, "That's me." Right. And I had been kind of stuck, and that's after just every morning waking up and thinking, what does Andy Osinga need to know about Flannery O'Connor today? I just pushed through to the end in a very short period of time.
There you go.
Each week when I'm preparing to interview somebody, I send them an email that says, "Hey, here are some topics I want to talk about." But then I also say, I'm not going to be working real hard to get through these topics. We're just going to start talking, and we're going to follow the conversation where it goes. And, it was funny to see as people were writing in, here are my favorite moments, how many of those moments were things that I had no expectation of us talking about, that I had not, because the magic happens in conversation whenever the alchemy. Now I'm mixing metaphors. We got magic and we got alchemy.
What else is it going to be, John?
But when Russ Ramsey and I are old friends, and so we started talking. We just started talking, and we got on the subject of, well, you'll see.
And so will we, apparently.
Well, I also had one person that I spoke with about writing about difficult relationships. And they said, as much as you don't want to write anything overtly criticizing somebody, you should also not want to do that in a veiled way either. Like, don't. And this person said, if you do, you'll probably find a year or two later that you wish you hadn't included that in the book. And I deleted some paragraphs from Struck in the writing process based on that advice.
These paragraphs weren't about me, were they?
They were not about you. Okay. They were not about you. But it was the kind of thing where we wound each other. Yeah. And so you want to tell some of those stories. And I think the advice they were giving me was, if you are wounded by somebody, is that anybody else's business to really know, especially in the form of a book, which is kind of forever. And then if you're going to do it in a veiled way, I will say in Struck, there are 1 or 2 sentences that I know carry some freight that the person who doesn't know the story, or even does know the story, would not pick up on. But I know. And honestly, now when I read them, I think, I could have done without that.
Yeah.
I could have done without that.
Yeah.
It was cathartic,
Yeah, right.
But, yeah.
Yeah, but you can have that catharsis without leaving it in.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, there's a great thing. It's a great practice sometimes to write it down and then delete it.
Yep.
As opposed to, hey, don't write it. No, sometimes it's cathartic to write it.
Yeah.
But then...
That's right. We need to distinguish the difference between writing something and then foisting it on other people, making them read it.
Yeah.
I had in my Flannery O'Connor book a reader, suggested that I take out a story that didn't reflect super well on her, on Flannery O'Connor, and B was somewhat hearsay. I think it was probably true, but nevertheless, it was not well documented. And he said, I don't think you want to do that. And I'm so glad that I didn't include that story in
Really?
that book. Yeah.
So you heeded the advice. You said,
I
know
did
what?
heed the
Yeah,
advice.
yeah.
Yeah. And I was very thankful for somebody stepping in and saying, I'm not sure you want to do this.
Yeah. Usually, if you have somebody that knows you and you trust, and they come and they say in a concerned way, I don't know that you want to do this, ties should go to them a lot of times.
Yeah,
You know,
I think that's right.
They're seeing something you're not seeing, and taking the risk in friendship to say, future you is not going to want present you to do what you're doing. You know? Yeah.
And then, sometimes, so of those first 99 episodes, 40 of those guests were people that are actual friends in real life. Right? Which, by the way, that's I'm very blessed to know 40 people that can be good podcast guests. But then, a lot of the magic happened with people I didn't know what to expect from. And so I was talking to Erwin Entz, and somehow we got on the subject of beauty. And he just blew me away. And you have to be a human being, or you have to be, I guess you have to have a soul to appreciate beauty, right? I mean, a lion can't say, that's a beautiful gazelle. He can only say, that gazelle looks delicious, I mean, and again, a lion's only relationship to a gazelle is I want to possess that thing and eat it.
That's great. That's right. Exactly right. You don't see the lion just pontificating on the beauty of the gazelle's leap. Right.
That's right. Yeah. That leap that we think is so beautiful to the lion is an inconvenience, right?
Right. That's exactly. Which to the point, and I make this point in our book, right, that beauty is not about utility.
Yes.
It's not about what is just useful. Right?
Yeah.
And that's why you find this reality, that the reality of human sin is that we want to possess, right? We want to own, right?
Yeah.
We want to center ourselves. And beauty is not something we, quote unquote, can own and possess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so this is why, for example, when you look at the civil rights movement and post-civil rights, you would hear African Americans use this term, Black is beautiful. Right? It became part of what African Americans would say.
Yeah.
And I argue that it's not because that in the history of America, the primary message had been that Black was ugly, but that Black was useful.
Oh man, that is great, Erwin.
Right, that it was about enslavement, usefulness, right, for economic purposes.
Yes,
right, and that's about possession. Right, and beauty is not about possession. Right, so that's even a declaration of liberty to say.
Yeah.
We could talk about that for hours. Right?
I know, man. I thought we were just having fun talking about, how lions couldn't see gazelles as beautiful. And then,
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, yeah. And beauty is, I don't think it's going too far to say that beauty by definition is that which cannot be possessed. Yeah. I mean, to encounter beauty is necessarily to come face to face with something that exceeds your grasp.
Yeah.
And if it didn't, then it wouldn't be beautiful, right?
Yeah. I mean, that was just one of many moments in the last 99 episodes of these huge ideas, some of which I was expecting, some of which I wasn't expecting, coming out. And since you mentioned the idea of possessing and grasping, this might be a good segue into something that Malcolm Guyte said. And by the way, let me just say, I mentioned that I got to interview my friends, which is great. The other thing that I love about this job is that I've got an excuse to reach out to people like Malcolm Guyte, James K. Smith, Tish Harrison Warren and say, "Hey, I know we're not friends, but could we talk?"
It's a great like way of sort of backdoor friendship.
That's right.
Request.
But so that let me tell you something about that. You probably already know this, Drew, but the people listening may not or don't. When I interviewed Malcolm Geit the first time, we had this great talk. He just blew me away. Oh. And after half an hour, I looked down and realized, because this was, I was doing this by Skype, and I had not been recording it. And I had to tell him, "Hey, I'm sorry, Malcolm, I didn't record any of that. We got to start over." And he was a really good sport, started over, was as brilliant as the first time, and didn't repeat himself.
Outrageous. That, man.
Anyway, so one of the Habit members who suggested this particular passage said, every college student should have to listen to this episode, and I listened to this on my lunch break, and it was like having a writing retreat on my lunch break.
Wow, that's high praise.
In other words, the shadows of imagination are bodying forth certain truths from the inner nature. And in fact, of course, Shakespeare had put the same thing even more clearly much earlier in A Midsummer Night's Dream, where he talks about, the poet's eye in a fine frenzy rolling, doth glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven. Mm-hmm. And as imagination bodies forth the form of things unknown, the poet's pen turns them to shapes and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. It's a bodying forth of the inner into the outer.
And that's the same speech, isn't it, where we talk about apprehending and not comprehending?
That's right. He talks about how imagination apprehends more than cool reason ever comprehends. And I think our ways of knowing are on a kind of spectrum between apprehend and comprehend. Yeah. And we move back and forth. I mean, apprehend, the prehend part of that obviously is to do with taking hold of something, like having a prehensile tail you can hold things with. So you can just about reach out to the apprehensible and touch a bit of it. The comprehensible, you can get your mind right the way around. Yeah. But actually, what you need all the time is a way in which you can woo the apprehensions, as it were, gradually towards comprehension, and also open the comprehensions out into new apprehensions. Yeah. And that mediating between those ways of knowing, imagination apprehends more than cool reason ever comprehends, says Shakespeare. Imagination is precisely the means whereby we do that.
Oh, exchange. Yeah. Love it. Because one way to make sure we comprehend things is to limit them to things that are small enough that we can reach around.
Right. Right. Yeah, And the idea of a God who both gives us a world we can begin to comprehend, but constantly beckons us through that comprehension and apprehension is fundamental to the Christian faith. So, the whole point about, the light shines in the darkness has never comprehended it. It can't be contained. And there's a kind of symbolic dynamic. I mean, I believe these things literally and truly happened as well. But between, on the one hand, the womb of the incarnation, and the virgin womb, and the empty tomb, the tomb that had never been used by anybody else before. And one of them speaks of the God who is bodied forth and comes to us. Mm. The other, the empty tomb, why seek you the living among the dead? The way he appears and then he disappears and then he draws them and then is the God who is always leading us beyond what we thought we knew.
Where do you even start with that?
I know. The problem with the Malcolm Geit episode is that, and this is what two different people told me, is why don't you just play the whole Malcolm Geit episode?
Right.
for the favorite moments. And that was a more or less random selection from that. We could have done any 30 seconds from that.
His ability to take such dense philosophy, really, and articulate it, so poetically, obviously, because he's a poet, is incredible.
I know. And like I said, that was his second episode he had done in 40 minutes, and he didn't even say that the first time.
Yeah, incredible.
I was similarly excited to have James K. Smith on the podcast shortly after his On the Road with St. Augustine came out, and again, and I think James K. Smith, or Jamie Smith, he really enjoyed being on just because nobody had really talked to him about Augustine with regard to writing, and so that I felt like we gave Jamie Smith a little something too.
Or you might say your character is his wants, which, by the way, that's what my character is too, as a person. It's what I want, and I make choices based on what I want, and then there are consequences, and then maybe my desires change. I think it's just so helpful in so many ways. For writers to think about these things.
I love this connection you're making, because and it also explains then why writing is such a science of the soul, as it were. I mean, it's the art that is the science of the soul, and why a novel can tell me more about myself and can tell us more about humanity than a newspaper article, because in a way the best literature is getting at people's hungers, desires, and is getting at is trying to honor the complexity of that. Mm-hmm. And I think Augustine, it's interesting. In fact, I'm talking to a friend who teaches at the University of Iowa Writers Workshop, Garth Greenwell, and when he teaches writing, he teaches Augustine's Confessions, and not just for memoir, but for a kind of writing that is attentive to the dynamics of desire, the way in which our loves are sort of the engine that drive our being in the world. And I think you're right that Augustine is, in that sense, I think one of the reasons why Augustine is still with us is because he was so prescient in that regard. Mm-hmm. And so it's at once very, very intimate. You can peer into a soul, and yet it also helps you to understand others. So it's I'm encouraged to hear that that's helpful in teaching writing too. That's very cool.
Yeah, no, that episode was especially special to me because I mean, first of all, Jamie Smith has so shaped my understanding of a whole lot of things, and those ideas from Augustine of the ordered and the disordered loves, shape the way I think about both my own life and other people, the people around me, and understanding their who they are and what they're about. And by the way, it gives me a way to be a little more kind to people who are in the wrong, knowing that my own loves are disordered too. But more to the point, for our purposes, it has so shaped the way I think and talk about storytelling, and it was just a thrill to me to talk to Jamie Smith about those very topics. Well, the story that the most people identified as their favorite moment was when Leif Inger started talking about a fox.
I think you can tell when a writer is working with an accessibility or an openness to delight, and maybe when they aren't. And I think, I don't always succeed in it myself, but mostly what I write for is to gain access to that sense. Look, there's just as an example, sort of how it transitions from life into work. Robin and I take long walks, like I was mentioning before, through Duluth, and a few blocks from our house, there's a beautiful sort of small wilderness, a park called Tisher, and there's a creek that runs through it, a beautiful, swift running creek that runs all year, Tisher Creek. It's very pretty, and there's a nice gravel path that runs along beside it, and there are bridges that go over it, and there's a fox that must live nearby. I've seen this fox a few times, and foxes are clever. But this one does something that I've never seen before, which is he hangs around one part of the creek where there's a backwater and a thirsty creature can go down and drink easily. And if you go down there, there's a little wet sand and there's mud that never really dries. And you can see the tracks of all kinds of animals there, deer and house cats and dogs and large birds and raccoons. But this fox that I keep seeing leaves no tracks. So 2 or 3 times I've seen him down there, standing by the water, getting a drink, looking around. And I wait until he's gone, and then I go down to find his tracks, because I like that language of animal tracks. And there just aren't any fox tracks down there. Somehow this fox, who is as real as you and me, has figured out how not to leave tracks. So I have this picture in my head of a fox drifting along the shore with his feet like a couple inches off the ground. and so delight, it's usually there if you are willing to see it, and it's usually free. So I think this connects to what you kind of mentioned in your email, which was the state of the, kind of the givenness of the world around us, which, as I understand it, just means, the world as it is, instead of maybe what we wish it was. But I think delight is that door that gives us both at the same time,
Gives you both what at the same time?
It gives you both the world as it is and a little bit extra, just a little extra. So the fox is there, but the fox is also drifting off the ground. Do you see what I'm getting at?
I think so,
It's like the world is solid and the world is corporeal, but it's also ethereal and delightful.
Yeah.
There's, I guess maybe there's an imagination or a childlikeness to seeing the world that way. But that's really the only reason I write, is because I desperately need to be able to see both of those things. And writing is the only way I have found to do it consistently.
When Leif was telling that story, I didn't quite get it. I didn't really know what he was getting at. And it was funny to me that how many people have said, have mentioned how delightful that story was. I mean, this story about delight. And I still can't quite make sense. I agree that story delighted me. And I don't know what the point of the story was.
Honestly, neither do I.
Okay, did you feel delight as you heard that story?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, I did too.
Which I guess that's the point. I don't know.
So that was the sort of crowd favorite.
Stumped me.
Yeah, right. I think my favorite story that I've heard over the last 99 episodes was told by Ruth Naomi Floyd.
I'm blessed that my father's grandmother, my great-grandmother, lived to be 109 years old. Wow. And she was the youngest of my great-great-grandmother, who was an enslaved African in America. At 6 feet 2 inches tall, she was taller than any other human around.
Wow.
But unfortunately, to break her in every way, as an example to the other slaves and communities, they made her become the mule that pulled the plow. So from sunup to sundown, this magnificent, handsome woman pulled the plow. And it didn't make sense because it wasn't productive, right? The mule could have done it much faster and more efficiency. By the time she was 28 years old, her spine was in the shape of an S, and she died. But my great-grandmother doesn't remember much. One of the things she remembers from her siblings telling her that on the way, her mother, the woman, the human being, the life made in the image of God, walked from that place of dehumanization, the plow, to her cabin, and on the way, search for beauty. Whether it's a pine cone, a blade of grass, a twig, a flower, whatever it was, she picked it up and put it on a saucer on the butcher's block, which served as the table. Also served as the table. And she would say, beauty is everywhere. You just have to look for it. I believe in my heart that if her life had been different, she would have been an artist.
Sounds like it.
And I believe that she was an artist. And she created as much as she was able to under the awful, awful genocidal, system of American slavery. I love that that's instilled in me.
Man, I mean, it makes me think of Betsy Ten Boom. A lot of the just the intense suffering and the finding beauty in a way that boggles the mind.
Yeah. But there's so much hope in that, and I guess when I heard that story, it just reminded me that what we're talking about, in this podcast, and these, every time we're talking about finding beauty, telling a truer story, and that's what that woman was doing, was telling a truer story than the one that she found herself in. It just feels like that story reminded me that this work is worth it, and it's important.
Yeah, it's about the dignity of humanity. And I'm just really grateful to Ruth for telling that story.
Yeah, me too. This is the point in the episode where I would normally say, who are the writers who make you want to write?
Oh, no.
But you've answered this before because you've been a guest on this podcast before. So I think we'll just wrap up. I just want to say just how grateful I am to you, Drew, for what you've done in the first 100 episodes of the Habit Podcast. And I'm just incredibly grateful to the people who listen and for the people who have voluntarily given their wisdom and their insight. I think we got a good thing going here, Drew, so let's just keep trucking.
Yeah, like all conversations, it's been a collaborative, magical experience, and it's not over yet.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Jonathan. This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com. And to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate. Special thanks as well to Taylor Linhart for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for Season 3 of the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorlinhart.com.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.